All right, so here we are. Looks a little bit different than it normally does, I suppose.
You suppose?
You suppose, yeah. So this 1.5 pastors really only have the half pastor here.
I don't have my beard today.
You don't have your beard
I don't
today.
have my beard.
So Pastor Will's in Tanzania. He's over there. He's doing a variety of stuff, but he's doing what he likes to do. He's teaching Old Testament. So
Yes. Yep.
And so it's a mission opportunity. He's over there, but we're due this week for a podcast. We talked about this a little bit before Pastor Will left, and did I ask or did I tell you or did I, the idea of coming as a guest today or joining and talking with me a little bit? Or?
A little bit of both. In other words, I didn't mess it up badly enough last time I was here, so apparently
Excited to have you back.
I'm here.
So,
I'm stand-in.
Well, it'll work.
It'll work.
I think so. So here's what I was thinking we could talk about today.
Okay.
And it's stuff that's kind of been on my mind because, as you know, as folks listening to what we've been doing here the last few weeks at Faith here and worship and with sermons and Bible studies and that kind of thing is walking through this idea of discipleship. And we have a vision model, which is connect, equip, serve, and send. And we've kind of been tying things together with what this looks like just as for us as Christians here at Faith specifically, this walk of discipleship is we're walking as Christians trying to, basically follow Christ's teaching and this kind of idea. But really also as we're coming into this last week of it, the last week of it is send. And it kind of got me thinking about a few different things. One, just the idea that, this Sunday we're doing this service Sunday where we're only doing one short service and we're sending out a bunch of service teams to get into our community to go to just do a variety of projects and try to get out and meet folks and just, the idea that, following the Great Commission that Jesus, is sending us out to be his hands and feet. But
Can I just say I am super excited about this
Yes.
Sunday? And I love the fact, I think one of the things that I am most excited about this Sunday is that all the service teams are being led by volunteers.
yeah,
It's all volunteer people that are organizing this, that are putting it together. It's our lay leadership. Kind of had the idea, I think, came from our executive committee, you and Pastor Will talking about it and through conversations and that. But other people have just taken it and run with it. And I love the idea of being the hands and feet of Jesus out in our community, doing things for other people, helping out, and that it comes from the people of the church.
Well,
They're the ones doing it.
and it seems like God knew what he was doing because he found the right people to put in this specific role for right now because they've kind of just taken this idea and run with it.
Yeah.
And see how it's going to go Sunday and all that kind of thing. But part of this then also got me thinking about just the notion of this is something completely different, at least that I can recall, that we've done at Faith with this idea. We're doing one service for only half an hour and then we're sending out these teams and wondering what that feels like for the people of Faith of, this is not our usual worship time. This isn't our usual way we do worship. This is not the way we usually do things. And then backing up a second, just more broadly, and you're thinking about this idea of being sent or the sending us out into the world and two thoughts kind of that fit within that. One, just when we look at the world that we live in right now, and maybe it's always been this way, because if you look at the early Christian church in Rome, and it was a mess then too, but I look at the world we live in right now, in a lot of ways it is a mess. It's a messy world. You see the ways that our culture are not living in ways or exhibiting things that seem very centered in God's word or centered very, very much in emulating or walking a life with Christ. And so I think in terms of the one side of it, just that could be really intimidating, but it also can be the side of it that's that much more necessary, that we as the hands and feet, the body of Christ, are actually out in the world, living in the world and out of the world to share that stuff. But then the flip side of that, going back to the idea of this Sunday and whether it seems really out of the ordinary, this whole question of like, well, if you're looking at this or thinking about this idea of as you're living your life trying to be the hands and feet of Christ, who am I to go make disciples? Who am I to be the one that's out there actually serving or actually doing whatever that entails in terms of, even if it's evangelism or whatever the aspects are and the spots that you're in your life, how are we equipped to be out there in a messy, broken world to do this kind of stuff?
Isn't that when I call my pastor? And say, hey, I know somebody for you to go talk to.
And just the pastors have to do all of it? Is that what you mean, or is that
Yeah, maybe not. That we don't default to that.
Yeah.
But that recognition that we all can do it, even if we don't always feel equipped to do it.
Or the fact that rarely maybe we feel equipped to do it.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, do we ever feel equipped to do it? And
So
do we mess it up? So I don't know where you want to start.
Maybe think about it this way. So this last Sunday in worship, we did 5th grade recognition. It's the last week of school
Yeah.
for you this week. which is a really fun time. There's just tons of stuff going on for the kids.
Yep.
We're on a picnic tomorrow. There's a fun night tomorrow. Kids are having lots of fun this week with their teachers. But there's also this moment, too, when you think about the fifth graders, it's the last year of the building. So we are sending them out.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious if you think about that just from the standpoint of kids that you've had over the years, or even kids that are in the class this year and the way that they're sent out, and whether, as a fifth grader, how old is a fifth grader? What, 11 years old?
11 years old.
Yeah.
Yep.
As an 11-year-old, whether or not they're thinking about whether or not they're equipped to get sent out into the world, to go off to sixth grade, whether they're going to Lincoln Lutheran or elsewhere, or whatever the next thing is. And then over the number of years after that, in terms of how God's molding and shaping them, again, with this idea of hands and feet of Christ, that they're out living in the world.
Yeah.
So
they're middle schoolers. They're ready for everything.
Yeah.
They know everything, right? I mean, come on, parents. If you have ever been the parent of a middle schooler or even a high schooler, they know it all and they're ready for everything in that. But no, I think that is a huge component of what we do in terms of ministry here and discipling people and preparing them for the world. Some of these children, I said it on Sunday, in this fifth grade class that's unique out of the 14, some of them have been here since they were 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
They started in our preschool at 2 years. Some of them came during their school age. They've maybe been here 2 years, 3 years, something like that. And then we literally have a student who's been here all of 2 months.
2 months, yeah, that's right.
She just started fourth quarter and has come in and has just flourished in this environment. And so they all came in at different points and came in different ways, different families, all of those kinds of things. And yet here they are now. We've recognized them as fifth graders for all the work that they've done. We recognize their families because that's an important component. It's not just about the kids being here, but it's also about their families and how we work together. And now it's kind of like, we unleash them to go out into the world, to go on to their next school. A lot of them go to Lincoln Lutheran, not all of them. And so wherever they go, and that's what we talked about on Sunday, is how do they continue to shine for Jesus? How do they reflect God's love? How are they prepared, whether they always feel like it or not, to live in this world and to go out to other places? And that's a hard concept to think about. In some ways, a lot of our families talk about, well, they're leaving the safety of our school. But I think that's what we as parents and as a school are preparing them for every day. I know when my children were young, I had somebody that talked to me, I had a mentor that talked to me and said one of the things that he had heard when his children were young, that one of his primary jobs as a parent was to prepare his children to live without him someday.
Yep.
And so he took that as part of his job every day. What can I do to help prepare my child for the day they leave my house, but even more so the day when I may not be on this earth with them anymore? And helping them to become responsible adults was the first part of it, obviously.
Yes.
But also how to walk their Christian faith, how to walk as a Christian in this world where they're going to be bombarded by different things throughout their lives. So I've taken that to heart as a parent, which sometimes makes my children go, "Don't you love me?" Yes, but someday. So you've got to learn how to do these things. But even as a principal then, in working with children, working with our educators, working with our families, of how are we preparing our children, not just academically, not just making sure that they can read and write and study for tests and all of those things, but how are we preparing them to live as Christians in a world that I don't know that it's ever been entirely friendly towards Christians. We talk a lot about how it's getting harder and harder to live as a Christian in our world today. And I do think that that's the truth, but I think it's always been hard to be a Christian and live in the world and not be of the world.
Yeah. I think that part's hard. I think culturally speaking, if you look at the United States, I think we've lived through a period of prosperity where it's been relatively easy to go to church.
Correct. And if you went to
much.
church, fine. It didn't really matter to people that didn't. And yet I do think that the existence of persecution,
Yes.
in terms of being a Christian today and how you are viewed because you are a Christian, has definitely changed.
So I like what you said about parenting, though, and thinking about it that way. I mean, I'm a parent. I've got a 9-year-old and 4-year-old right now, but and something I heard just a little while back, I like this metaphor of thinking about it this way, and I like this metaphor even in a sense thinking about it with the standpoint of the church, too. So I'm going to go kind of dual tracks with this, but the idea that what are the safe spots that a kid has,
Yeah.
and that you start off from your safe base or your safe harbor,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that you're encouraging your kids as they grow up to be willing to go out on a ship and go for a journey and explore. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's as a really little kid to go out and explore on the playground or go out and explore in the neighborhood. And at what points that they feel more comfortable to get a little farther away from mom and dad, get a little farther away to explore a little bit, but they always know that they can come back and there's a safe spot they can come back to.
Yes.
There's a safe spot that if things don't go right and they ride their bike in the neighborhood and they fall and skin their knee, that they can come home and mom and dad are there to help. And maybe in the same sense of the church, if we're thinking about this idea of sending folks out, that that when we're here together as the body of Christ, that we're both being built up vertically with our vertical relationship with our Lord, as
Mm-hmm.
he sustains us through word and sacrament. He sustains us through how he reaches out to us to draw us back to him, and then we also sustain each other horizontally through how we can be there for each other as we walk with each other. But that is in a sense the safe spot, and then as we go out into the world, how comfortable and how far are you willing to let your boat go out as you dive into the world and you're really to engage the culture. And I don't know, maybe we could do this, I suppose, because I find for me sometimes that if I think about was I equipped or am I equipped to do the next thing, sometimes it's easy to look back to the things that I didn't think I was equipped to do that now I've gotten through,
Yeah.
that I didn't know how I could do then, but then either that's the thing that God then reminds me to help me think about the next thing, but also just to, an easy example for me is just thinking about when I was taking care of my dad when my dad was sick. I did that for a number of years. I moved back home. I don't have to go into all the details of that, but there was some really tricky parts of doing that. And if you'd asked me at the age of 18 whether I was equipped to do that, I don't know that I was.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I would have thought I'd been able to do that. And that's it's something really personal. It's something family related. But as I look back on it now, can also see in the moment how readily God was right there with me to equip me to be able to do the things I needed to do, and then also learn from it and grow from it so that it helps me do the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about kids, I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot here or not, but
Yeah.
think about kids and the we had just a bunch of fifth graders this week that are just finishing up school and everything. Are there any fifth graders you can look back on that have left over the last several years and whatever that they maybe were equipped for, or whoever else it might be, whether it's kids or not, just to that same idea of looking back and be able to recognize that I didn't see where this kid was going to do this, or I didn't see that this spot was going to be able to go this way, that was going to go, and to use hindsight as the way of recognizing that God equips us even when we don't necessarily feel like we're ready for it.
Yeah. I think definitely, and I very much am a story person. I'm a relationships person, so tell me the stories of people and things like that. And as you're talking, a lot of what it brings to mind is that whole concept of taking a village to raise a child.
Mm-hmm.
I think about it in the lives of my own children. It's not just about me as their parent, but it's who else is in their lives, and that sense of community, of coming together and having the horizontal in addition to the vertical, of I have this whole community that my children are surrounded by, with friends, with teachers, with people in our church, and they have other people they can confide in. And I've been blessed to be that person for some of the children that have come to our school. Mm-hmm. I can think of some specific young men and women who are now adults. Yes, I've been here that long. Who at various points in their life were struggling with things, or with friendships, or being exposed to different things of the world and that, and not always knowing how to deal with it. But they knew they had people they could go and they could talk to about it. And there's a few, not a lot, but when I was classroom educator especially, there's a few where you form some of those relationships that go beyond the classroom. Mm-hmm. And they knew I was a trusted person they could come back to. So for example, some of them who ended up in the schools and they were making friends, and friends were getting into some things that really weren't the best choices. And how do I approach that? What do I do when I'm in that situation? Well, who do you have that you can call? I never got called, but there were some students that knew, call me, I'll come and get you. Yeah. If they didn't feel they could call their parents. Dealing with boyfriends and girlfriends. So lots of those different situations that our young people go through that then as adults, they're still dealing with. But especially when you have friends that haven't grown up in the church, that don't understand why you might make different lifestyle choices. and that you're not necessarily judging them if that's what they've chosen, but that's not what you're choosing for your own life. We see it come full circle then when they start having children and they decide to bring their children back here. There have been a number of our students where they've fallen away. You know, sometimes we see a drop off. They stop coming to church when they're not in our school anymore. And I can think of a specific one where did not see this child for years. And they went through some bad things. They ended up in some bad, tough spots in that and ended up having children of their own. And when it came time, though, to think about who do I want helping to take care of my children, they reached out to us.
Yep.
And reestablished that relationship. And so we don't always know how exactly we're equipping people or how God's going to equip them or when they're going to need various people along their route. But that's where the relationship comes in. That community comes in. That safe place comes in.
Yeah.
Even if they've gone away from faith, church, and school, they still remember it and can come back when things get hard. The number of students or parents even that I've had asking me to pray for their child because they're struggling as a young adult. And that's a blessing. Now, did I do anything great and tremendous in their lives? Was I like, oh, the best teacher ever, and they did all of these things?
Maybe.
No, well, maybe. Maybe they think of me in that way. I certainly don't. But they knew I cared.
Yeah.
I had that relationship with them. And I always tell my students, and you heard me say it on Sunday, once you've been in my class, now that I'm principal, now once you've been in our school, a part of you is mine forever because I'm going to carry you with me wherever I go. And I'm going to continue to pray for you. And I want to know how you're going or how things are going in your life and what you're doing. I see him in high school. I see him out and about in other places and that. And it's always, hi, Mrs. B. And I'm like, hello, come give me a hug. How you doing? How's life? Things like that. It's that sense of community, I think. And that's so much of what the equipping is for us. We don't always know what the right things are. We don't always know exactly how to go about it and how to reach out to people or how to talk to them. If we think about it in the context of how do I talk to them to bring them to Jesus? Well, no, it's just how do I talk to them and how do I share Christian love with them and be a part of their life, which might open the door to having some of those other conversations.
I really like that. And because I think I'd be admitting that I'm guilty of this sometimes, that if you think about, well, I'm sent out into the world, and whether it's evangelism that I specifically think that there's just a spot that I'm going to be able to tell somebody about Jesus.
Yeah.
Or if it's just the idea that I'm talking with a coworker or a neighbor or, you know, whoever it is in your life maybe, and you're just being yourself and in a sense trying to be, you know, we talked about emulating Christ this last week.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the idea that in a sense I'm showing Christ's love, like you just said. But the thing I think I'd be guilty of is this idea that somehow before I can talk to somebody, I need to figure out all the things that I know that I can say the right things.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether that's the right points of, well, I need to know that I know my Bible and I can quote John 3:16 if I need to and know what that means. Or I need to be able to understand Lutheran dogma or Lutheran doctrine. And if it gets into a contentious point about but usually that's not how life works.
No.
I mean, you talk about telling stories. I mean, usually life is some glimpse of sharing stories with one another. And it could be sharing the stories of, here's what happened to me when my dad was sick. Or it could be, here's what happened to me when I went through this tough time in my life. Or here's what happened to me when I went through a really wonderful time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the notion that, you know, how easy maybe it is. So here's an example of something we did when I was growing up. We used to do this yearly trek to the Ozarks. And, you know, with my mom's side of the family. And in the evenings, we had this thing where throughout the day, there was this jar set up in the table at this camp that we'd stay at. Anyway, there's probably 20, 25 family members typically there. And people could put notes in asking for stories to get told.
Okay.
And then each evening, we'd have time after dinner where, it pulls it out and, Grandpa's supposed to tell the story about this time this thing happened. And it's just for all us to laugh about whatever funny thing that Grandpa did at one point or cousin whoever did this thing. And it was just a lot of time to just tell stories and laugh.
That's cool.
And it was a lot of fun. And we did this,
Yeah.
you know, we did this every year. We did it typically almost every night. And it'd just be, sometimes stories might get told every single year. Sometimes it'd be the news story of, you got to hear this funny thing that happened when such and such did whichever. But if you think about the way that we interact in just relationships in general, it's typically telling stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's typically telling some version of ourselves, some version of who we think we are, and I think in the whole sense of, so Jesus says that we're sent out as his hands and feet again.
Yes.
Is that, am I equipped? It's like, well, am I equipped to just talk about who I am? Am I equipped to talk about, well, who I am just in terms of me, but also who I am because of who Christ has made me to be? And then I also think it becomes this part of it where, if we're thinking about our culture and what our culture needs or what our culture is up against in terms of it gets epistemological in a way. That's the word that pops in my head because I'm a nerd and whatever. But knowledge base, like what is the knowledge base that somebody's coming from and what they think that they know about what they know.
Yeah.
I was on Twitter last week and it was this string that I was on. I was reading and it was several different people that were just misappropriating scripture, and it was relating to pro-life issues. Don't have to go into all the details of it, but it gave me this interesting glimpse to think, if I was talking to somebody about this issue, about why we as Lutherans value life, and that's what our last podcast was about, so I don't spend much time on it, but giving at least a little bit of a perspective, if I was in the spot to be able to talk to somebody about why we believe what they do, but also why we believe what we do, but to have a little bit of a glimpse of maybe where they're coming from, because they've engaged in the culture in a way, to live in the world, not of the world, and then to think about, well, how do then I tell my story about who I am as me, but who I am because of who Jesus has made me to be, that's also cognizant about how it might resonate with where they're at.
Yeah. Well, and it's thinking about those things in connection to one another.
Yeah.
It's not just telling my story to tell my story, but it's recognizing where they're at and what their needs might be, and how can we enter into this relationship with one another where we can learn from one another. And through that conversation, you're going to hear about my life as a follower of Christ.
Yep.
And that's going to come through, even if I don't speak specifically to it.
Yeah.
But it's how I witness through my conversation, through what I'm doing in my life. But it's also recognizing what their needs are. Not just spouting things off, trying to evangelize them, but recognizing how can we make that connection? This is where you're at. What do I have? What stories are in my life that I can relate to you, that we can have this common conversation about?
And even the fact that it's not just reactionary. The fact that, as much as you look at hindsight and you look back, okay, well, I can definitely see how God was equipping me for these things, but I didn't see at the time. But to be thinking intentionally about where are the spots that God's opening up doors for me to really show up for somebody in a way that the world wouldn't show up for them.
Correct.
And it makes me think of it, so this is a different thing. It's not about the cold spaghetti. We'll start it that way. But
okay.
I used to work in restaurants years ago. And
okay.
I worked in a spaghetti restaurant. And I think about this sometimes just in terms of trying to understand where somebody else is at and put myself in their shoes. And I can think about, in some ways I've sort of glossed this into just this hypothetical, but it's an actual thing that would happen. But so say it's a mom and two kids and in the spaghetti restaurant, and the mom's frustrated because the spaghetti is cold.
Okay.
And maybe the spaghetti really is cold, and maybe she has every reason to be frustrated about it. But in the midst of dealing with that, in the midst of working through that, you can see that there's a lot more behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there was some fight with the kids in the car on the way to the restaurant, and the degree to which they're upset about the cold spaghetti is factored into a bunch of other emotional stuff. Or maybe it's been a hard week of work, or maybe it's been a whole bunch of questions about existential stuff of, I'm struggling with God's law because even though I don't know what God's law is, and I'm struggling with the fact that I don't know what life really means because I don't know who Jesus is. And it's all this stuff that they couldn't even necessarily put into words, but it's this emotional stuff because they're trying to figure out a messy, broken world.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the layer behind the layer rather than just the cold spaghetti, maybe you're then intentionally finding that spot where God's letting you show up for them, like I said, in a way that nobody else would show up for them, because Jesus shows up for us in a way that nobody else would.
Yeah. It's some of my favorite students that we have here at our school. They're some of the ones that I see the most often as principal. And that, which means that what they're showing may or may not be what the real issue is.
Yep.
And it's what's in those layers behind. And how can I be there? Sometimes when kids come to my office, it's not that they need me to lay into them or tell them how naughty they've been or whatever. Sometimes when kids come into my office, they literally need to sit on my lap and I need to hold them, because that's what they need right then. It's coming out in other behaviors. They're showing other things, and yet they're hurting. And how can I be there and help them to feel safe and to know this is a safe place and I care about you? And how can we do that for other people in our world, for our friends that are struggling? I can't walk in their shoes, and yet can I in some way see what's going on? We all wear our masks. We all like to put things on so that we think we're putting on this great front.
Especially maybe in Nebraska, and the shove our emotions down. We're all fine all the time.
We're fine. We're fine.
Yeah.
I think I even said that last time. But the only way we can do that is by being in relationship with one another. And that's part of the blessing of what we get to do each and every day. And that's part of what I'm excited about with the Service Project Sunday. Because it's going to be going out and making connections with people, doing things for people that are going to be a blessing to them. And some of them we may not ever see. The people that are going like to Orphan Grain Train, they're going to be doing work and they're not going to see the people that are the recipients of that. And yet, by taking a little bit of time and doing some things, it's going to have a great impact on the people who are going to be touched through Orphan Grain Train. And those people are going to remember that there was somebody who cared about them, that there were supplies for them or whatever it may be needed. The people that are going to go to police stations or fire stations, it's a thank you. We see you. We recognize you. We value you and what you do for our community.
Thank you for making Lincoln a safe place. Thank you for responding when somebody needs help in a car accident, where the example is all the different
Correct.
ways, things you don't even see.
Yeah.
And just, so yes, and all that stuff, because I love the whole thing of thinking about the Service Sunday and whatever way it's going to be connected. But I also think about it from the standpoint of just for us as believers in Christ, the people here at Faith, and maybe whoever gets touched too, but for us here at Faith, the notion of getting back to the, am I equipped to do this?
Yeah.
And maybe this is a small little step, or maybe a big step. I don't know how big it is, but a step in the direction of going out on your boat away from your safe place.
Yeah.
To try this a little bit, adventure a little bit, and in a way that my hope for it, and my hope, at least when I think about this idea of being sent and being in the culture and being in the world and be able to show up for people a different way, that we can find joy in it. You can find joy in those moments. God just opened this door up for me, and I get to show comfort to somebody in a way that God's comforted me in a different time.
Yeah.
Or I can show up for somebody in a way that, again, nobody else typically would, because typically you're just feeling the burden of God's law in your heart. You're feeling, and to actually show up with grace and mercy and love for someone, even when they don't feel like they deserve it.
Mm-hmm. And even taking it the next step, stepping out a little bit maybe out of your comfort zone, because you might be going and doing something with another family from faith that you don't know very well.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity to make connections with other faith people while we're also stepping out. And so there's almost, it's compounded in some ways, and yet thinking of the ways that by just taking a few minutes to make a connection to another faith family as you're serving together to do things for other people, what a tremendous impact that has, not only on other people, but even in our own lives. And when we step out of that box just a little bit, I mean, we are Missouri Synod Lutherans. We don't like to change necessarily. But as we step out of that box just that little bit and think about how God might bless that,
Yeah.
and allowing that opportunity to take place, I think it's a cool thing.
I think it is too. And I don't know if there's any closing comments I have or closing thoughts. I'm excited about it, like you said. I'm excited just to see how God's at work. I'm also just, I take a lot of comfort and joy in this idea that God's got doors open, or God's got doors that He's ready to open in our lives all the time, where we can show up to be His hands and feet. And that we don't have to show up thinking that we're going to solve things, or we're going to fix things, or somehow we're ever going to know what the resolution is, or what the end results of the seed that gets cast is. But just to know that all around us, when He says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations," baptizing them, teaching them, there's several pieces of it that maybe we think that all has to happen at once, and there's just little moments, little steps all along the way where we get to just show the love of Christ a little bit. That's pretty neat.
And we don't always realize we're doing it.
Yep.
I think that's one of the biggest things as an educator and in my position is when people come back and they share stories or they share memories with me, the things that they remember are not what I expect them to remember. They're not the big things. It'll be some little moment, and I may not always even remember it.
Yeah.
But it was important to them. And that was a little opportunity where I didn't necessarily think I was doing anything great and wonderful or anything like that, or sharing Christ with them, but it's a little comment. It's one little thing. And as we go about our daily lives, God gives us those opportunities all the time. We just don't always recognize it.
Absolutely.
And so we are equipped because we're living it every day without even realizing it. It's just when those big moments come that we think, oh my goodness, I have to be ready for this and everything. And it's like, nah, you're doing this every day of your life as you go about it. And every time you come back to worship, every time you come back to this place, it continues to fill you up and prepare you for going out again.
Yeah.
So, at least in my head, that's how it all works.
We'll see how this weekend goes.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, since Will's gone, do you think that the folks listening anyway, do you think that we should let Will come back when he gets back? Just have Krista with us all the time, or?
No comment. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. He's sitting back in this seat. I'm turning it back over to him.
Well, it's been fun.
So,
thanks for filling in.
Yeah. Hopefully it went well. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for letting me join.
I don't know what to call you because it's 1.5 pastors. I don't know what that fits in. Some sort of. I don't have any good witty
I don't
either. So
today's just half a pastor.
all right.
And another person. There you go.
Another person. All right.
All right.
Well, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.